for joining us in Devva's Room, a special series hosted by Lead On and powered by the Force for Health Network. This is designed to be an interactive space where we honor history, elevate lived experience, and reimagine the future of disability justice together. Dr. Devva Kasnitz believed these conversations belonged in our communities, not just in classrooms. And today, you helped make that real. To keep learning, connecting, and organizing, join the Lead On community at the Force for Health Network, where your voice truly matters. Until next time, thank you for showing up, speaking up, and standing up. In the words of our inspirational leader, Justin Dart, known as the father of the American Disabilities Act, who passed away back in 2002, I love you. Lead on.
I just realized that I played the outro instead of the intro, but that's okay. Welcome to Lead On. And I am your co-host, Lucy Howell, and I'm joined by Dr. Robert Gillio, and we are the co-founders of the Force for Health Network. We are doing a series called Devva's Room in partnership with Lead On. Lead On stands for Leaders Engaged in Advocacy and Disabilities. And we are, I'm looking to see, I believe my co-host is on, although she's probably looking to go grab her avatar here. And when she is on or ready to speak, then we will kick it off with Susan Fitzmaurice. But while we're waiting for that, Rob, share with the group a little bit about what it is that we are trying to do with this interactive community chat with a full focus on the disability advocacy space.
Hi guys, I'm Rob Gillio. I'm a physician. I've been on I'm the guy who's the one turning the knobs on the ventilator and taking care of people in the intensive care unit. Not really dealing with disability until very recently. And a year ago, I learned after a fall on 4 different surgeries for spinal reconstruction, learning how to walk again, that disability can hit anybody at any stage of life. So as advantaged as my life has been, and the situations that I've never really had to think about disability except for my patients, now I'm living it every day. And I got introduced to this wonderful group at Lead On with a vision to really help make awareness about disabilities something that's not just in the classroom and not just with advocates that are way off on the fringe of leading all the policies and trying to drive and move the needle. Everyone needs to know about how disabilities affect folks, and everyone is able, everyone is, every privilege we all have can all disappear, like our eyesight or our hearing or our ability to walk in an instant, or it could be something you're dealing with your whole life. So at the Force for Health, we have built a series of content and network delivery tools to share the message and amplify the message of great groups like Lead On, give them the opportunity to learn about how to get ready for surgery, how to recover from surgery, or how to deal with that newly acquired disability, or how to deal with that law that might be changing in the current political environment, or the funding that might be changing. So what I can say is, Susan, Gordon, Lead On. I'm gonna sit back and get out of the way here and watch as the show progresses and as the series of shows progress in a multimedia format here in this room on the Force for Health, but also here live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on other media platforms. And then ongoing in a virtual chat room that when you click on that Lead On button and come into Force for Health and the Lead On chat room, you're part of the community. And so this conversation can be continuing. The PowerPoints can be shared. The videos can be archived. So it's not just a meeting once every 3 months or once a month that disappears. So thank you, Lucy, for including me in this. I am not an expert at disability. I'm just learning how to deal with it.
I am thinking that Susan is on with us, but we're just not seeing, and it looks like we lost her. So she will come on, and when she is in, she will bring her to the stage as a co-host. And you know what? I'm going to bring her right now. Susan, I know that you may be having some issues with your camera, but I wanted to go ahead and see if you can hear us and join us and perhaps welcome everybody, because Devva's room is your baby, right? Let's see if we can get her coming in. She was just on. Susan. Okay, if she does not come in shortly and I see her, that's okay. We're going to lead on, right? Our other co-host, Gordon Fuller, life happens and had to kind of get out and go see a doctor today. So, you know, like we're doing, we are going to lead on and carry the torch. We've got a tremendous lineup of friends and colleagues of Devva's to go ahead and talk about the two topics today. And let's see if Susan is here yet. Okay, so today, well, let me bring this up because really this is so powerful. And it really is helping to drive how we connect and advocate all together, from a mainstream mama to our chief medical officer, Dr. Rob, to then, of course, the friends, colleagues, and subject matter experts in and around this space. And when we were talking about disability issues and advocacy, kept saying nothing about us without us, nothing about us without us. So we are so happy to work with everybody here to make sure that empathy is growing. So if I'm not living with a disability, but maybe a family member is, our goal is to educate, reduce stigma, and support and promote families. And let's see, I'm keeping an eye on Susan as she tries to come in here. Okay, so let's just go into who we have teed up. Part one is going to be featuring Mark Friedman, who is a professor at, I believe, NYU. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about what he does. And Ruthie-Marie Beckwith was planning on joining us, but again, life happens, and Mark's going to go ahead and take it all on his own. So Mark, welcome to the stage here. And, you know, it's been so interesting working with Susan and Gordon about disabilities. We've done so much with maybe one of our other channels, Advance the Dream, which is minority health disparities. I've got things going on with my girl power, gender disparities. And so this whole disability space warrants all this attention, and basically what you guys have shown us so far. I'm very excited to be partnering with you guys. So welcome to the show. And I'm going to continue to watch and monitor Susan to see if we can bring her in when she can.
Thank you for having me, Lucy, and I'll be whenever you're ready.
Okay, awesome. So you want me to go ahead and bring this to the stage?
Excellent.
Perfect.
Well, hello, everybody. Let me give my deep appreciation for having me here and extend my appreciation for all of you coming to Devva's room and to think about who Devva was and what Devva did and the work that she did. I do several things. I am a associate adjunct professor at the City University of New York, where Devva was a scholar and a hero and a instigator of disability studies there. CUNY has one of the most significant programs in the country on disability studies, and Devva was a really important part of that and was a mentor to me and a leader. So it's very exciting to be having this session, to be trying to promote Devva's legacy and the things that she did and the things that she presented and gave to people and helped people. Number of things that Devva did. She was an incredible mentor, and not only at the university, but places that she worked, things that she did. And so it's a real honor to me to be here. My colleague and partner and wife, Ruthie-Marie Beckwith, had a family emergency, not for herself, but for somebody else, and so wasn't able to be here tonight. So it really is talking about as a title of disability studies in a time of chaos. And I don't have to tell anybody here the chaos that we're in, the tumultuous times as we speak here. We are talking about, people going into the streets tomorrow is demonstrations in 1,800 cities across the country, major issues around immigration. And I'm going to tie that to disabilities. I'm going to tie the time that we live in to the time of turmoil and both fear and danger that we face. And I've been doing this for decades, and we face the more significant crisis and pushback on disability work than we've ever had in our lifetime. And so I'm going to tie disability studies to the reality that we live in. I've modified what I had intended to do. I thought it really was a celebration of Devva's life, and I really have to connect up to the tumultuous times that we live in. So this is where it's disability studies is more than a theory, it's a movement. And disability studies comes out of movements, and I'm going to share that with you. So just as an overarching piece, Lucy's kind of laid out to you. You want to have some interaction. Feel free to raise questions in the chat box. If somebody, Lucy or somebody will, pose those as we go along, or some time where I take a breath or something. And we can also do that at the end. We'll have time for that. And there's a chat box and people can raise. So this is really talking about the things that people have been doing. So disability studies really comes out of, as a movement, it comes out of disability rights. So without disability rights, there wouldn't be a disability studies program. And so many people see it just as simply another academic endeavor. But, I see it and I take it, and the work that I do is around disability justice, is around movements, it is around how can we empower people. So on the right is Edward Jung and the Disability Empowerment Center, and the things that people have done to build rights for people. And the many times that this is really coming out of Berkeley, where the disability rights movement really was started, and helping people to be able to move forward. On the right is a picture of Edward Roberts. He was really seen as the founder of the disability rights movement and the things that he did. And my point and contention to you is that this really builds on that. So disability studies and disability movement came out of the main movements of the 60s. On the right is a screen of Martin Luther King voting rights demonstrations that people had, much broader than disabilities. And then on the bottom is the 504 protest. And on the right is really Judy Heumann, probably one of the most current famous disability rights activists, who passed away almost a year and a half ago now. And without these, I don't think that we'd have a disability rights movement, or we'd have disability studies. And so on your screen now are all the different sort of ethnic studies that happen for people. And so we can see the disability studies as part of these other efforts to make the world better, to deal with people who are many times unwanted, discriminated against, pushed out. And so we have critical race studies, queer studies, ethnic studies, Latino studies, Hispanic studies, and critical race theory. Critical race theory, I should mention, is really what's driven the current administration to just crack down and be sort of crazed over the notion, and to try and drive out. Ohio, the state of Ohio, last month, legislator in its wisdom just decided to defund disability studies programs in all. There were three places it was in the state of Ohio, and they've just ended that. So these are the examples of the times that we live in. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of a distasteful piece, but really oppression, that disability rights comes out of oppression. And we can't talk about disability studies without looking at how people with disabilities have been left out, have been excluded, have been oppressed in many ways. And what we see on the screen is really the eugenics movement. And it's hard to imagine today, although currently with the things that we're seeing, it's coming to the fore, but it really is hard to imagine how eugenics, which was people being segregated, people being put away in institutions at Ellis Islands, people being turned away. If you had a disability, X was put on your back with chalk from the inspectors, and you were sent back from wherever you came. The posters on the screen are really that the promotion that we wanted to have. These are from the 20s and 30s, that the stock was going bad, the American stock was going bad, immigration was too high. You can see the connection to the day we live in today. And that we should only have people who were healthy. We had something called health fitter babies. The middle is 3 generations, no imbeciles. This is a major Supreme Court case that was in 1927, and really set the stage for sterilizing over 60,000 people with disabilities in many, many states across in almost every state across the country, called Buck versus Bell. And then on the right is just the eugenics movement, and how pervasive it was. And the thing that makes it important, I think, from disability studies perspective, is that the eugenics movement was by the intelligentsia. So it was the people who were the brightest, the most wealthy, of course, the people who were in positions of power. And so this is where the background and sort of this foundation of disability studies is, or has to be. It's not just an academic program. And here we have a picture of a protest against forced sterilization. Not only was sterilization against people with disabilities, but even in the 70s, Puerto Rico had almost a third of the fertile women in Puerto Rico sterilized from U.S. Immigration Service. So these are pieces that people, and eventually, as some people don't know, many people know that eugenics came to its fruition in Nazi Germany, ended up in death camps, but the plan for euthanasia was started and perfected with people with disabilities. And so from the society accepting that, oh, those are people, as the famous saying said, they came for the Catholics, they came for the Jews, they came, but they didn't come. And finally, when they came for me, there was nobody there. And that's what we're seeing today, is a divide and conquer. And that's where the disability studies as an academic basis is trying to look at these things and see, what are the really fundamental issues that are present here? What are the things that one really needs to analyze? And so these are some of the background that in many ways is distasteful what we can see. So disabilities discrimination is just a poster we've seen for a lifetime, going back to slaves, going back to the time of the Romans. But it hasn't always been that way. And there have been certain societies where people with disability were valued and were promoted and were assisted in things. And so it isn't just modern days that we've seen this, but it's sort of always been. And on the screen on the right-hand side is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was in many ways a hero. The New Deal brought about prosperity, brought about services, but he was afraid. He himself, as powerful as he was afraid to be seen in a wheelchair. This is one of the only pictures that exists in the archives of FDR sitting in a wheelchair. And so as powerful as he was, one of the richest people in the world, the Roosevelts, he was just one of many, but the Roosevelt family was extraordinary, was what we would call today billionaires. And yet even he had the influence. He became the governor of New York State and eventually the president. But even he is powerful, you might say the most powerful man in the world, he still couldn't see himself being shown as in a wheelchair. He thought that would be too weak and whatnot. The picture on the left is just showing a person with disabilities and a hand, that basically the issue, you're just not welcome here. And that's what disability studies is trying to overcome. It's trying to overcome inclusion. It's trying to overcome the laws that have put people away and laws that promote, like with the Americans with Disabilities Act, for example. So here is just a poster, actually sign, a protest, disability rights, civil rights. And so my contention to you is that disability studies came out of disability rights, and that's what we're trying to do. That's what disability studies is, promoting justice. So inherent in disability rights, it's not a kind of cold academic study. Its inherent basis is to say, how can we have more disability rights, disability justice, people with inclusion being part of society. And so that's the purpose of disability studies. That's the purpose I teach. It's the purpose of having students become this. We're not just trying to have people gain careers and go on and be able to be practitioners or whatnot. So what's on the screen is sort of my conception of disability studies. And I see disability studies as a subset of the disability rights movement. And I think it's critical to be able to see it that way. And so what you have on screen is the disability rights movement is made up of protests and laws and court cases and the executive and departments. For example, we're seeing those things all turn against us. And so the disability studies is one component. It's trying to bring research and trying to bring knowledge and trying to teach people and trying to broaden the conception that we have of disability, of inclusion, and being a part of society. And as most famously has said, nothing about us without us. And so we're seeing today many of these things turn against us. We're seeing the protest increase. We're seeing the laws, the 504 currently is at the Supreme Court being protested, being trying to shut down. The court cases being reinterpreted to ways that the ADA, for example, the executive bringing power, the Office of Civil Rights, which is has been, and I have to say has been because they have literally closed it down, has been a fundamental place in the education field, particularly both in K-12 and also in universities to promote rights, and a place that individual students could file a complaint. And that's not anymore. The laws are the same, but the implementation. So this is my conception of where I see disability studies playing such an important role. So let's just talk about the core of disability studies is really the medical model versus the social model. And in essence, the medical model, well, it has many good things of physically helping people, coming up with overcoming diseases, improving many conditions, is really a static model that is the I concept to fix the person. The social model is they have changed society, that being disabled is fine. It's the normative part of society. We're trying to increase what's called the bell curve, that people with disabilities are part of society, are part of the normal part of society. It's not something fringe. And so the person doesn't need to change, the society needs to change. And that comes from that flows. We need to have adaptive things. We need to have ramps everywhere. We need to overcome steps. We need to be able to get on the planes. We need to be able to have accessible internet, web pages. All of these things flow from that versus the medical model. So the medical model has been helpful to help people improve, but it has really had an overarching focus on fixing people. And one of the pieces that really comes from that is really, really troublesome is it really comes to this thing that, we really should not have any disability. That medicine has the magic and amazing and phenomenal fixes and advances. And you see all that with artificial intelligence, that the artificial intelligence is going to bring us, magical powers to fix, and then we won't have any more disability. Recently, there's a study that's out that shows for Denmark that they've increased the number of people able to get the testing, genetic testing before the baby is born, and 95% of families who have come up for Down syndrome seek abortion. So you can see where the society is under the medical model. And so what we're trying to do is promote the social model. And on the screen is really talking about the medical model, and it's just a cartoon, but it's person needs medication, the person has special needs, the legs won't work, they can't climb the stairs, they can't work full time, and all these things are things that people can't do. The medical model is useful. For example, it comes up with wheelchair that can climb the steps. It comes up with amazing surgeries that can help people live longer. It has done a lot of things. People's spina bifida, was once a death sentence, and now people can live. A number of things that it does. So please don't misunderstand me. But at the same time, that promotes the idea that society doesn't have to change, that the person is defective, and we're going to somehow help them become a normal person who can be, therefore be entitled. And so what we're saying is that in the social model, and what you have on screen, what are the barriers? That the world is disabling, and we have barriers, and we want to overcome those barriers. So, for example, there's environmental barriers like making steps that are easy, have ramps on them. Organizational barriers is probably one of the biggest issues. A stigma of jobs. One of the issues, I'm working a lot on artificial intelligence. One of the issues is artificial intelligence. Most jobs now are screened through artificial intelligence, and we found that there's biases right in there. That if you show up as a disabled person, you're just weeded off the entry list, so you don't even get to the interview that you might have. Attitudinal barriers is probably the biggest one of people, thinking that, oh, my son or daughter or my friend or whatever is disabled, and that's going to be a life-threatening, terrible life that the person's going to have. They're never. And we saw this a week ago in a really terrible way from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert Kennedy, saying, if you're autistic, you're never going to have a job, you're never going to have a wife, you're never going to have a house, you're never going to be able to do, and on and on and on and on. And so here, in terms of attitudinal barriers, is just reinforcing all those things that already exist versus trying to show people who's capable. All this brings us to what we started out with, which is really nothing about us without us. So, can we get included in everything? Can we get included in the design? One of the issues here is what's happened in most adaptations is that after the fact, things get adapted. So you see that on the computers. While we've made huge advances in accessibility, they're all done after the fact. So let's just throw out a new phone, a new Palm Pilot, a new device, and after the fact, we'll try and adapt it to fit. You see that on web pages consistently. Facebook is an example. The different categories, the different algorithms, the pieces that are sort of the software in the background that makes it work, and then we'll adapt it. And what this Nothing About Us talks about is that we want it on the front end. We want the front end of the design of the buildings. And this is where the law comes into place and the Architectural Barriers Act and things and we're seeing all those watered down. And so this is the struggle that we're fighting with today as we're moving into these things. So I do want to mention the criticism, and it is very widespread and legitimate, is disability studies actually white disability studies. This is a very famous article written by Chris Bell. It's in the major book. The Disability Studies Readers is the most popular college teaching book about disabilities. The article's there, and it really cites and speaks to the issue. The people who did protesting in the beginning were white. The disability movement came out of primarily white people, and almost all, myself included, writers and scholars and teachers and professors are white. And so how does that play out? What does that mean? So on the screen is feminist disability studies. Well, think about that. Why does one need feminist disability studies? Well, because people have been left out. Critical disability studies is looking at critical analysis of the disability studies field itself. And then on the right is New Directions in Black Disability Studies. It's a conference. So again, why would there be a study that's about Black disability studies? Well, primarily because people have been left out. People who are writers. There are many issues around that, but it's been really a significant thing. People don't get opportunities if people aren't get into PhDs. If they don't get into college, then how do they get their work published? More and more work is done in blogs. It isn't published. So there's a whole series of things. But I put that on the table just as an issue as the probably most significant issue in disability studies is this inclusion, which is now intersectionality, the term that Professor Crenshaw adopted, and is really the notion that when you have multiple oppressions, multiple issues, multiple disabilities, or even if you're a woman and you're African American or Hispanic and you have a disability, that these all come together and they compile upon each other. And so you have multiple issues that, in many ways, that's the critique of the white disability studies, that these aren't being taken into account. So with that, I just sort of summarize myself and come up with my hero, Justin Dart, that Lucy mentioned in the beginning, and said repeatedly, lead on. And that's really to you. He used to say, I had the good fortune to know him. And to have him at the end of every time we be together to say, Mark, lead on, lead on. And so I leave that with you. It really is to you as the participants here is to lead on. He liked to say, vote like your life depends on it. And, speaking about really is that we're currently in the stage that, demonstrate that our lives do depend on it. And we're seeing, pushback that we've never seen before. And hopefully we'll be able to staunch that. But some of the things, of the funding crisis are really going to affect us all. With that, I will summarize and come to questions and answers that people want to ask, or I come back to Lucy, and I thank you for Lucy for having me here, and the other people who'll be speaking and being with you today. Lucy? We can't hear you, Lucy.
My dog was barking. I did not want to interrupt that fascinating flow of content and information. It's really interesting from a, I'll call myself a Main Street mama, just kind of the everyday. I'm trying to get a decent view here. I keep reminding people that, we're not that far from the 50s and 60s where folks had to fight for everything. And kicking off Devva's room last week, right, with the Disposable Humanities documentary and talking about the T4, program where I learned that over 300,000 folks with disabilities were killed and murdered and exterminated. We'll say exterminated, right? Because of these issues. And so it's just crazy how, and we're going to be talking to Scott Cooper coming up because he's got this collection of stories, and we're going to be showing a video from 10 years ago and just how relevant the content still is. So what's your thought? Do most schools, so I'm going to ask you now Susan is backstage. So Susan, give me the thumbs up if you want me to bring you on as is, or if you want me to go ahead and wait till you've got your avatar pulled up on there. But do all schools have a disabilities and justice program? I'm just going to start with some very general, general community questions for you.
It's expanding over the last several years. There's really 5 schools that are really sort of the most prominent: the City University of Newark, Syracuse University, Caltech. But more and more, schools are having them. My school has undergraduate and graduate. But there are a lot that come on as undergraduate and they're an elective course. So, that expansion has been, a really positive thing to be, and there's great interest in it. The problem now is that it's really ironic that disabilities was not really part of the DEI movement. And it was a criticism that, didn't include people with getting jobs and whatnot, but it's now included with the assault on it. And so, people who are doing disability studies are, being frightened and worried about their funding. But up until now, it's been increasing. And so, there are more and more colleges that do have that, and that particularly undergraduates, are learning, and there's great interest. There's tremendous interest in disability work, disability studies and disability work.
The 2 leaders of Lead On that we partnered with, Gordon Fuller is blind, and Susan Fitzmaurice has recently had an issue that has paralyzed the left side of her body. And so she is in bed continuing these incredible advocacy efforts from Zooming from her iPad on her bed. And so Susan, I'm going to go ahead. Can I bring you to the stage as is right now for you to interact? Perfect.
Yes.
See, exactly, because sometimes she's like, I usually don't come on camera because this is not what I want to portray. I'm like, but it's important for people to kind of see, the true advocates. And you've just been an absolute Force for Health hero for me in how you continue on and lead on. So I'm so glad. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties here, but Susan, we did not have you kind of, so again, you are here, right?
Yes, I'm here, and I've been coming in and out trying to do things, but.
Hi, Susan. It's great to see you.
So I heard you asking about disability studies programs. So I started my disability studies degree in 1999. And then there were two programs to choose from. There was the University of Chicago and there was Syracuse University, and that was about it. And at that time, the University of Chicago was very medical model, and Syracuse University was very much the opposite, but very developmentally disabilities oriented. And so I basically had to make a choice between those two types. During the 2 years that I was getting my degree, disability studies flourished. Suddenly they were sprouting up all over the place. There was some in California, there was some in Colorado and Texas. So once it caught on, it's really started to catch. But for a long time, it was just Chicago and Syracuse that were doing it, and with very different philosophies. UIC, University of Chicago, was very medical model, very rehabilitation counseling oriented, and Syracuse was really the exact opposite. But I actually pursued a rehabilitation counseling degree and a disability studies degree at the same time. And so, because I wasn't really sure at that point whether you could do anything with the disability studies degree, because I was going to be one of the first ones with it. So it's like, what do you do with it once you get it?
Right, exactly.
So I got the rehab counseling degree as the backup. I've never used the rehab counseling ever. But I have used the disability studies, but never as a required degree. Just that's what I experienced and what I read and what I learned was more applicable to the work that I ended up doing. And what I learned in rehabilitation counseling was mostly what I tried to unlearn.
And Lucy, just a comment there. We started about 2 years ago a program in disability services in higher education. And today, almost every college has a disability services office. And so this program really trains people, both in assistive technology and in law, and it really is helping to permeate people in all these offices, services in all these colleges who have some knowledge base and understand what they're doing.
Well, hats off to Susan for actually scoping out all of these interesting topics throughout the rest of the year, right? And so, of course, last month we kicked it off with Why Are We Here? We did a recap of Devva's Shiva, and then we did the Disposal of Humanity, just to kind of set this stone. But I thought it was interesting how Susan set up this as the next one. Like, what is disability studies? How did it come to be? And quite frankly, let's spend the last, couple minutes of this segment talking about why should we care? I mean, the State of the Union now seems like baby with bathwater, just throwing everything out. You say the word disability or you say the word equity and it automatically gets cut, canceled, and thrown out. And so I'm curious, what's your thought on the State of the Union and what's like one key action item that perhaps the general community, right? You guys have a great following within your space. And what we're trying to help bridge out is into the public health messaging and how we can help. Because I feel like we're all 1 degree away from having somebody in our family with a disability, right? So what's the feedback on what we can do?
I think the big issue is for the ordinary citizen to understand how these cutbacks are going to affect them. That almost every person in America knows somebody who has a disability.
Mm-hmm.
Their cousin, their grandchild, somebody has autism, learning disabilities, speech problems. And right now they're getting services. They get services through their school district. They get services through, the government. In some way, they're getting services that are funded by the Medicaid. And I think right now people don't understand how these cutbacks are going to affect them. Maybe not them, somebody that they care about, or somebody that they know, or their neighbor, or the restaurant waitress, who has eye problems. And so I guess that would really be the piece that's missing. is that people just don't understand how these gigantic cuts, are going to affect them. That the Medicaid and the federal funds, do fund speech therapy at their local school, do fund just an example, the library. So, their grandkids is coming to the library program, to get this sort of, after school piece. It funds people who, are getting food stamps. And so I think right now people think, well, that's the other, it doesn't really matter, doesn't really affect me. And I think that the second thing is that people think that when they get sick, say they're in a terrible accident, or they get, suddenly, as you said, Lucy, everybody can get a brain aneurysm, tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And, their insurance will cover them. And if it doesn't, the government will cover them. Well, that government those dollars are not going to be there. So I think helping people understand, and right now it's pretty well hidden. So I think people don't appreciate, how this is helping them.
I mean, one of our fearless leaders, Gordon Fuller, on this co-hosting deal that's not on the show right now, but he mentioned on a meeting last week that there was a new initiative to no longer require wheelchair access or accessibility access to public buildings, and I don't know the specifics on that, if it's new buildings going up, or is it like, oh, you have the ability to modify your space? Do you have any input on those recent regulations that are being tried to put forth?
Well, it's a broad assault on all of these things. So to your point, both pretty much the new regulations, are stronger. But when you adapt or refit your building, you pretty much come under those same regulations. So they're pretty strong in what you have to do. The bigger the building, the more regulations that you have. And so in all ways, it's really an assault on the idea that people shouldn't have to do something. The government shouldn't be forcing people to do things. And so it moves away from us as a community that, we want to help our neighbor. And so we're going to have fewer of these things. And these are battles that we're in currently. And these battles are going to wind up, in the next 3 and 6 months, that are going to potentially change America for, decades. And again, people just sort of say, oh, that's the government, they're bureaucrats, they're forcing people to do these things. But they don't understand, how when someday, a relative of mine just had a stroke. She's in a wheelchair. She never expected that. Well, she needs that ramp to go into that building. And as these things, if they, in fact, are watered down, then we're going to lessen those things. And people will, down the road, one of the problems is that it's not going to happen instantly, but it won't be like for buildings. Well, that's not good. Those things might not take effect for 2 or 3 years still. But suddenly they'll be going to their doctor's office and they won't be able to get in. And they'll go, what happened here?
I think it's a perfect segue right now. And I don't want to say goodbye to you yet. I want to start to kind of meld into our next segment and introduce Scott Cooper to the stage. Scott, how are you? And
I'm over in the Zoom room here, and we're having a heck of a time syncing your show with our Zoom room. There's about 20 of us here. And I'm sure there's a lot of people here that would love to engage with Mark. And I don't know how we're going to make that happen, but I'm gladly yield my time to find a solution for Q&A for some of the other great leaders in our chat to share.
Well, Scott, I'm interrupting, but I do that. So firstly, Scott is wonderful, and we just love him. If you can't get any of that to work, the failback would just be, if you would just read whatever's in the chat box and pose it as a question, and I'll respond to it. We do a lot of that in Zoom.
Since we last met, I've went blind. I got macular degeneration, so the chat box to me is a blur. So I think Hey Aloha was supposed to be moderating it in the room, but I was just trying to fix this because this happened last week too, and I just like to
listen. Don't even worry about it. The fact is that this is recorded, and can be like shared later. But if all we need to do is get the Zoom room to be screen sharing from the Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live, or YouTube Live, and that's it. And if they have any comments in the Zoom room, they can post in the Zoom room, or Kealoha could be sharing the speaker link and they can come in and interact. But until then, I wanted to introduce everybody to you because you are leading some really interesting things. And I'm just going to share screen quickly here with your
Kia Gardner's,
website.
sorry for the interruption, but Kia's in the chat, ready to read the questions.
Okay, really quickly here. You guys can see the It's Our Story website.
I'm going to
right
stop
here.
this. Alice, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share on my screen and go over here to do my 10-minute thing. I'll be back in 10 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Let me get this. Let me get over here because I was working on 2 browsers here. So let me enlarge your screen.
Well, here's the thing, Scott.
Okay. All right, I'm ready.
Yeah, no. I wanted you to come on so that you can actually add on to the conversation that we're having as we tee up, It's Our Story, which is your project. You're working on this disability history project. And we wanted to just maybe play one video from that project that kind of sets the stage. This is a video back from 2000, I believe, 13, 14. And it's called About the Worries of Tomorrow. Right. I think
it was even earlier than that, 2009, with Terry McBride Johnson, our legendary author of the disability movement, especially when it came to the eugenics component of it. But this is just one clip out of 30 clips. They're usually oral histories are usually 90 to 2 hours long, and I will put a link in the chat for people that are connected to this stream, which will also go to the rest of her rest of the 29 other clips that she did during her oral history, as well as some others from It's Our Story YouTube channel.
Perfect. So, let's just watch this and we're going to come back and talk about it. Okay. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
It's Our Story. Harriet McBride Johnson. Presented by the 88 Legacy Project. The Worries of Tomorrow, Part 28 of 29.
I think when you say worry, it's institutionalization. That's what I worry about for myself, and that's what I worry about for everyone. And I think when you're talking in terms of society, institutionalization represents not only a really tragic impact on lives and families, but it means that we are disconnected from community. And once we are disconnected from the people who might otherwise care about us, we're vulnerable to abuse, neglect, exploitation, and even extermination in various forms. That all those things become possible when you remove people from connections with other people. Right now we are seeing movement away from institutionalization. I have reason to hope that that movement will continue, but it might not. We may have, enough kind of misreported fires in group homes or, homeless, mentally ill people causing problems. These anecdotal stories that get blown up and blown out of proportion, they make it swing the other way, that we have to put them all in safe places. And if that happens, it's a tragic loss for the people who are affected, but also for a society that's trying to be decent. Because it really is true that when you're out of sight, you're out of mind. I can say that with a mea culpa, because when people are institutionalized, I no longer visit. I'm scared to go there. And so that makes it even more scary, knowing that that's my attitude. How am I going to depend on people to visit me?
Be inspired. Be informed. Be involved. We plus you equals power, passion, pride. The It's Our Story Project is a national effort to make disability history public and accessible. Visit us at www.itsourstory.com or the It's Our Story Project YouTube channel.
Okay, so the that was an interesting segue, and kind of connecting from the first episode to now, a then and now, how this is not a one and done, fix it and we can move on type of issue. This is a continued kind of fight for advocacy and support. So Scott, welcome to the broadcast, and please share with everybody, who you are and what your mission is and what you're trying to do here. And then we're going to go ahead and prep into our second segment here.
Yes, I've lost visual on this browser, but I'm in the Zoom room now. So am I getting a visual on your side?
Of course, you are here.
Okay, great. This was just one of over 1,600 conversations with disability leaders throughout America. And I got involved with Devva actually a couple years ago through the Kennedy Center, or not the Kennedy Center, but through the Smithsonian's ambitions to create a national museum. And Devva and I had the same kind of mission, that we would just like to have a directory of all the archives of disability photographs, newsletters, history, documents. And that would be our first step in creating a virtual museum. But along with that directory would be the digital solutions to take our undigitized content and put it into a organized database that would be open source for researchers and students. Because my primary interest was a very narrow focus with my oral histories. I basically went to leadership of all ages and got backyard stories of all the states, and directed the conversation for National History Day, for the content to be used in presentations that 600,000 students participate in an annual competition for grades 6 through 12. And since my real corpus behind my thing is just collecting primary source material for future generations to interpret the experience and find correlations of similarities, but somehow things don't evolve as fast as we'd like them to. So that was just a short thing of what I do and how Devva and I intersect. I first interviewed Devva back in 2006. I've a lot of her friends, a lot of the nesters, as they lovingly refer to themselves as, are in the archives, and a lot of them I've missed as I'm crisscrossing America. But I love you all, and as Justin Dart, lead on. It's a good way to move forward. And I will fill up the chat when I get back online with links to the virtual museum work group and how you can get involved with the directory of archives. Because we're missing Devva's leadership in preserving the SDS archives, as we all know are under fire with the current administration.
I think Devva's dream was to take this conversation out of the towers of the academia structure and to take it to the mass public, right, and community, so that stories can be continued to be told, because that really is the best way to build empathy, I believe, because we're all humans, and like you said before, Mark, we are only one incidence away from perhaps finding ourselves in a similar light, right? So let's see. We've got.
So I'll first start off by putting the information in the chat over in Zoom room, and I'll come back over into your room and do the same thing into your chat. So that way you'll have a link to our weekly events over at the Virtual Museum and the Directory of Archives, which is our primary mission from now until 2027. So
okay. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much. And you know what? You had done a short documentary film of 3 historic leaders in the disabilities movement. I believe you did it with your son.
Right. That was when he was in 12th grade.
12th grade? Oh, I love that even more.
That's a history project.
Yes. So I was offering to you that we were going to add it to the Force for Health Academy and badge it. So anybody that watches that will receive a It's Just Us Basics badge, so that we can just say, like, okay, you're leaning in and you're learning more. So I think that that's great that you did that with your son, and we wanted to offer up that to you.
Yeah, it was a planned word. It's just us. We spelled it JUST-US.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
That's how you can find it on Vimeo. It was banned on YouTube because we used the Rolling Stones and Pink Floyd and a bunch of other Ray Charles, because Ray Charles was Justin Dart's favorite, and so we used each of their favorite musicians. Pink Floyd was with Wade.
Interesting. Well, I only watched half of it. I haven't watched the whole thing yet, but I'm looking forward to doing it. And this is a big part of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel or recreate content, because you subject matter experts already have this. You've been in this space. You're telling the stories. So how can we just incentivize people to get involved, watch, and, perhaps give them incentives to share more information?
It's making our story actionable to future generations.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so any further comments on our first segment, which is kind of State of the Union for the disability and advocacy space, before we lean into kind of a history lesson with our next guest, Laura Dean? Are you on a scale of 1 to 10 optimistic that the groups are together and can be strong and powerful no matter what, administration is leading? Or are you scared?
There's a famous saying that I like a lot, which is that I'm an optimist by birth, in spite of the evidence.
That's right. We almost have to be, right? If we're going to be advocates, you have to maintain that hope and positivity. Yes. Otherwise, you're not going to be an advocate, right? You're going to
as we speak, there's 1,800 demonstration protests that are going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah,
we'll be at one of those, and there is hope that people will speak up.
When I worked with the Women's Commission and did kind of a deep dive on women's history, I was born in 1969. Don't do the math, anybody. But it was interesting to see the decade of the 80s as the least civically engaged for advocacy. And it was because all the fighting and the marches and everything that everybody fought for was in place by then. I'm not saying everything, right? But it's kind of like it ebbs and flows. And so it's not going to go away. And we're just going to keep raising the voice so that these gaps of coverage and support are recognized and addressed. And we're going to gamify it. That's what the whole Reality Health Games is. We want to recognize communities and heroes that are doing best practices right, so that we can go ahead and complement that. So Scott, great to see you. Thank you very much. And Mark, you are welcome to stay backstage and come on back with Laura Dean, but we're going to go ahead and bring our next speaker up to the floor. And this is Laura Dean. Let me see if Susan is back here to perhaps introduce her. Susan? And if I don't hear from you, I will take charge.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back.
That's okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead and introduce Laurel.
So I can't see you for some reason. Is Laurel here?
Yep. She sure
good.
is.
Okay. Great. Well, Laurel is one of my favorite speakers, even though I've only met her once. But she was so captivating, and she taught me so much in a very short period of time that even though I think it's 5 years ago that she spoke, I still remember every word. Her background is in history, disability history, women's history, all kinds of history, and she makes it fun. She makes it interesting. Not that other people can't do that, but she does an amazing job of it. I wish I could have taken classes from her.
I wish I could have you in class, Susan.
I would be a history major if she would.
There you go.
My history teacher.
Oh, thank you all so much for having me. Yeah, you go, Lucy. Sorry to interrupt.
I was just going to say the topic that is that Susan has crafted for you is ableism and activism during the founding of America. And again, with all the things that are going on in this country, the more we know, the more we know. And, we're not this clickbait, citizenship that's just reacting on the fringe here. So I'm excited to hear from you and learn from you. So without further ado, Laurel Dean, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and then go ahead and kind of jump into it.
Yeah, great. So thanks so much for having me. Thanks to Susan for inviting me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and glad you all are hanging in there almost at 8 o'clock on my time at night. So I'm a history professor. So I'm an early Americanist. So I study the 17th and 18th century. And I'm a historian. I spend my day in archives. I also teach at the University of Notre Dame. And I've been in disability studies and early American history really from the beginning of my time in academia. So, these are fields that really don't talk to each other. So, disability studies scholars are an incredible group, as you know, but tend to focus more on modern periods, right? This current world that we're living on in the 19th and 20th centuries. And then historians of early America really, they're not familiar with disability studies. It just hasn't been on the radar. And so it's been a real joy to kind of bring these fields together over the past, 15 years. And in case I want to tell you about the book that I am really finishing, like it is going to be out next year. I've been working on it for a very long time, and it is about ableism and activism in the revolutionary period. So I have a short presentation I thought I would share with you, and then I'm really excited to hear your questions and comments. Before I get into that, I do want to provide a brief content warning. So, I'm going to be drawing from 18th and early 19th century primary sources, right? These are, old documents that I found in the archives, and they certainly do not describe disability in positive lights, right? There's often offensive and harmful material here. So most of the time, I've chosen not to, repeat these words in my talk. There are a couple examples today where I have left these types of words in. And I've done that, in part to be true to my source material, like this is the material I'm drawing on, but also because some have really specific legal and political meanings that are important to kind of the story I want to tell. So there are also, content reasons for leaving them in. But I do want to give you a heads up about that, and also make explicit my commitment to using this offensive language as sparingly as possible. So I wanted to start with a story. I want to begin in May of 1783. The American Revolution is just drawing to a close. And in Massachusetts, in a small town of Woburn, town selectmen, who are like the town officials, they moved to place a local man named Joel Richardson under guardianship. The selectmen said that he was a quote, and here's some of the harmful language, he was an idiot, lunatic, distracted, or non-compos mentis person, and he was incapable of taking care of himself. Reports from Richardson's wife and neighbors also kind of tried to confirm this, right? So they said that he was squandering his money so much that his wife feared for her subsistence. So the probate judge soon ordered a formal inquisition. He called it inquisition of Richardson's mental capabilities. And this followed early modern English and colonial precedent. So basically, the selectmen met Richardson at a specified time and place. I'm not sure exactly where it was, but probably a local tavern or maybe his home. And then they asked him a whole bunch of questions: his name, his age, his family members, about his personal property, to assess his ability to manage his property. They also asked him to complete simple math problems, like arithmetic problems. How many shillings were in a pound, for example. So 3 months later, on September 3rd, and this is the very day that statesmen signed the Treaty of Paris, which formally ended the American Revolution and recognized the United States. This very day, the Woburn selectmen informed the probate judge that they had found Richardson to be incapable. This finding justified his placement under guardianship and severely curtailed the rights and freedoms he was set to enjoy in the new nation, the very, very new nation, right, that day. As a property-holding white man, Richardson should have been able to buy and sell property, to make contracts, to sue, to vote, to serve in public office, establish residency, legally govern his dependents, among many other rights. But under guardianship, he was denied all of these rights. And instead, his nephew, Bartholomew, gained full control over his property and person, making decisions about his living arrangements, dependents, and legal affairs. Richardson was a staunch patriot, and he was a supporter of the American Revolution. But his legally determined mental incompetence prevented him from enjoying much of this liberty and equality that was promised to him in the new nation. So Richardson fought back. 1 week later, he appealed his case, and he used the language and ideals of the revolution to frame his argument. So he drew on that rhetoric. He wrote to a probate judge that the selectmen's finding of non compos mentis was only the effects of only the effects of prejudice. So basically, he called out ableism, right? He said it's only the effects of prejudice. He said there's no positive proof to support the facts. I was not cited to give reasons why a guardianship should not be granted over me. And I really love this. He continued with a slight against the selectmen. He says, I am as capable of transacting my own business as ever I was, or as any of the selectmen are or ever have been. Richardson's petition concluded by invoking the hard-fought ideals of the revolution and the laws and principles of the new United States. He said, I think I have an equal right with all other of my fellow citizens to the peaceable enjoyment of my personal liberty and property. So unfortunately, the probate judge was unconvinced. He denied Richardson's petition, but Richardson appealed again, this time to a higher court. These justices were more amenable, and they revoked his guardianship and reinstituted his legal capacity. Okay, so I wanted to start with this story because I think it demonstrates two very, very important things about disability in the early United States, like this moment right after the nation's founding. First, the United States is rooted in ableism. Drawing on early modern English and colonial American example, early national people barred those they deemed to be disabled from rights and privileges as varied and significant as voting, holding property, making contracts, testifying in court, serving in the military, serving in public office, marrying, immigrating, settling in towns, governing dependents, and living freely and independently. After Richardson was placed under guardianship, he lost nearly all of these rights. But many people who were not under guardianship, right, who had physical or mental disabilities, but were not didn't have that formal label or formal custody arrangement, they also were denied these rights. Ableism, as you might know, is a system of power and privilege, right, that hierarchically ranks people according to ideas of fitness and capacity, normativity, productivity. Ableism shaped the early United States. People with physical and mental disabilities lost access to a whole bunch of duties and rights. They were relegated to second-class citizenship. I also started with Richardson's story because I think it demonstrates how disabled people resisted and how they advocated for greater access and opportunity. Richardson's story is not unique. He was one of thousands and thousands of people who challenged legal, political, and social restrictions based on disability and who demanded greater rights, who demanded greater access. And like Richardson, a lot of these people used that rhetoric, that language of liberty and equality that had gained so much power and purchase during the period, right? So this language of liberty, equality, rights, and citizenship is circulating widely, and disabled people use that to advocate for their own ends. You know, famous statesman Thomas Jefferson was saying people had unalienable rights, you know, of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Disabled people made the same arguments. They use that language for their own agendas, for greater access. And I think we're used to thinking about disability rights as this 20th and 21st century, you know, movement, right? This thing. But I really think the antecedents of this movement happened much earlier, when this language of rights in the 18th century became publicly available, and disabled people used it just like, you know, women used it, just like African Americans used it. These people latched on to advocate for themselves. So I'm going to keep going. I didn't write down how much I started, but please stop me if I'm talking too long and you have questions. But I did want to share a little bit about just paint the contours of this movement, kind of how I see it kind of more broadly. And then I wanted to just share some examples of people advocating for themselves, and then I'll stop for questions. Okay. Basically, this movement is geographically and demographically diverse. So disabled people advocated for their rights from Massachusetts, Woburn, Massachusetts, to South Carolina, to New York, to Kentucky, and everywhere in between. Some disabled advocates, like Richardson, were property-holding white men, right? These people who had the most power and privilege in society. But many, many people who advocated were not of this status, right? They were white women, they were free and enslaved Black people, they were Indigenous people, they were poor people. Many of these people and others claimed their rights to equal citizenship as well. I also want to be clear that this 18th century movement is pretty distinct from the 20th and 21st century movements that we're much more familiar with. So unlike kind of more modern periods, this 18th century movement is, it's like individually focused, it's self-interested, and it lacks a larger revolutionary agenda, right? That this, you know, really came to the fore in the 20th century movement, right? So first, disabled early Americans, they really didn't necessarily see their causes in common, right? You know, somebody who was resisting a marriage restriction, say, didn't necessarily see someone who was trying to, you know, advocate for entry into the military. They didn't see their causes in common, right? So this didn't mean that people didn't work together in the 18th century, but the movement wasn't broadly coalesced, and it didn't span across race, gender, and class, really, right? So it's distinct. And also, you know, 18th century people most often tried to work within the system rather than overhauling the system. Now, there are certainly exceptions, and I can tell you about them, and they're amazing. But for the most part, people advocated for greater rights and opportunities kind of within the established system without seeking to overturn laws or practices. Cool. But nevertheless, I really want to emphasize that this early American disability rights movement, I believe, and I have evidence for, it was really powerful. It was disruptive, and it was incredibly influential. And it had strength in numbers. You know, thousands and thousands of people relentlessly pressed their cases, pressuring judges, officials, and everyday people to make America more equal and accessible. So I have a couple examples for you. Take Henry Bartlett of Franklin County, Kentucky. In 1802, he challenged his exclusion from public office because of a mental disability. As he explained in court, other magistrates had argued that he could not hold the position of magistrate because he had an unsound and deranged mind. Bartlett argued that he was commissioned and qualified for the position, and that he wished to fill the office of sheriff. Although the county court sided with the magistrates, precluded Bartlett from office, he won on appeal, and he went on to serve as the Franklin County Sheriff. 8 years later, in 1810 in Virginia, Christopher McPherson, who was a wealthy, free Black man, petitioned the state legislature for an exemption based on physical disability. The city had recently passed an ordinance that barred Black people from driving carriages except while serving white people. But McPherson argued that he and his wife were subject to disease and they were unable to walk, and that they deserved to ride in their carriage not only for their comfort, but also their health. He said the new rule deprived him of rights to which he is entitled under the laws and Constitution, and the legislature ultimately issued him an exemption. 5 years later, in 1815 in Maryland, Anna, who was an enslaved woman, advocated for herself and declared that despite having a disability, she was prepared to be free. She was prepared for freedom. So at the time, Maryland law prevented enslavers, slave owners, from manumitting or freeing disabled people who, fearing that their costs of their support would fall on the state. So basically, if you were deemed to be disabled by county courts, you were unable to receive freedom, even if your enslaver wanted that. So the county court deemed Anna not sound in mind and body, and thus ineligible for manumission. But she resisted. She claimed that she was mentally and physically fit for freedom. Despite an early victory in a lower court, however, the Maryland Court of Appeals deemed her not healthy, and they returned her to slavery. Also in 1815 in Connecticut, Maddie Parmalee, a white widow, appeared before her state Supreme Court. She had recently been placed under guardianship, but she contested the arrangement, arguing that it had been imposed without due process, violating her rights as a citizen. She explained that she had not been given any opportunity to be heard on the subject, nor did she have an advance notice of her hearing. Unfortunately, her claim was also unsuccessful. The judges decided that she didn't successfully demonstrate how guardianship had harmed her, and then refused to grant her legal independence. I have just two more examples for you. In 1820 in New York, a man named Fisher, who described himself as born deaf and dumb, defended his rights to sell property. The buyer of his land, who still owed him money, argued that the deed was invalid because Fisher's deafness rendered him unable to execute a contract. Fisher argued instead that he had sufficient intelligence for the management of his property, and he was capable of communicating by signs and motions so as to be well understood. Moreover, he argued the fact of his having been born deaf and dumb should not disqualify him from the right to make contracts. The chancellor ultimately sided with Fisher. He did say, although deaf people should be presumed incompetent, Fisher had demonstrated his capacity to sell his land. Finally, in 1821 in South Carolina, William Miles, who witnesses described as blind in one eye and seeing badly in the other, advocated for accessible transit. When the operator of a ferry refused to assist him in boarding, which caused his cart to tumble over, he sued for damages. The county court found for the ferryman, claiming that his losses were a result of his disability, but the Constitutional Court reversed the decision. Ferrymen must have their flat so constructed that it will be easy for carriages of all descriptions and drivers of all capacities, they declared. So these are just a couple of the thousands and thousands of people who challenged disability-based restrictions and advocated for their rights and opportunities during this period. From diverse backgrounds and regions, they claimed the promises of the revolution for themselves and insisted on their liberty, equality, and citizenship. Before I stop, I will just briefly mention what I see as the eclipse of this first disability rights movement, which of course never died, and the legacy, obviously can be felt in our current moment. But my research does suggest that there was a backlash to this movement. There was early gains and then a backlash in the mid-19th century. With the growing number of cases and claims issued by disabled people, judges and officials worked to clarify the meaning of disability and also justify these restrictions anew, especially in this nation, right, that had liberty and equality supposedly at its root, right? Justices and officials work to justify these restrictions. And I think one method, really a powerful method, was through medicine, right? So judges and officials increasingly looked to doctors to decide who was disabled and who wasn't, and to defend these exclusions. Basically, doctors provided medical evidence in sort of a guise of impartiality and certainty to say that disabled people were unfit for full citizenship. Of course, disabled people continued to resist, but I do find that kind of a medically articulated and justified ableism curtailed disabled people's new rights in the mid-19th century. And you can think about histories of institutionalization and many other kind of histories that demonstrate this backlash. So I'm going to stop there. I hope that was helpful, and I'm really looking forward to questions and further conversation.
I'm adding Susan back to the stage. I was trying to just bring up Pops when you were saying, and I'm just going to start this off by saying, again, you don't know what you don't know until you know you don't know it. And now I know it. And now I'm fascinated by it, right? And so, like, if when Susan shared with me the title of this, it reminded me of being in the Pima County Tucson Women's Commission and having this argument with somebody 3 decades older than me about the word suffrage. And I was like, I didn't know as a 38-year-old what the term suffrage was. And that was so sad. It's just the right to vote. It's just the right to vote, people, right? And so, like, to me, ableism was one of those terms that is now in that bucket of, like, everybody should know what this word is, ableism. I don't know if I would have been able to properly define it prior to this. And so I'm just kind of bringing this up. I just grabbed it quickly,
Thank you for doing that. Great definition.
Yeah, and didn't know if you wanted to comment on this particular definition or just expand upon it. My second point was, I'm just kind of curious, since you took us around the founding of America, right? So that, even women weren't whole, from our constitutional rights and stuff. I'm curious, was there a big difference in ableism from, like, England to US? Was that kind of like a freedom now felt that maybe wasn't felt prior? Those are just kind of my couple comments from your talk. And then if you're in the Zoom room, feel free to post some comments in there, and then we will get them over to here. Or anyways, those are my comments. Any thoughts on?
Lucy. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. So thank you for putting that definition. I agree. I mean, ableism is a preference for able-bodiedness and the corresponding discrimination of disabled people. I'll also alert people to T.L. Lewis has an incredible definition that is freely available online. It's a working definition of ableism that they update mostly every year. So I would encourage folks to check out that definition too.
T.L. Lewis?
Yeah, T.L. Lewis. That's right. Yeah, Talila Lewis.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, this is all good. And we all have, multiple definitions, right? And they're overlapping, but yeah. So in the Revolutionary period, right? So many of these restrictions were also established in early modern England, right? And in the colonial America, right? This is not something new. This is not something that Americans, in 1776 suddenly invented and said, oh, we're going to discriminate against disabled people, right? This is a long-standing tradition. And yet there is something different about the new nation, right? So we are going from this moment when everybody is a citizen, is a subject by birth, right? So by birth, you are a subject of the British Empire, right? And everybody is a subject of the British Empire. And suddenly, with the new nation, some people are citizens and some people are not citizens, right? And so you have this moment where there is this inclusion and exclusion. Who should be included? Who should be excluded? And like women, like African Americans, like a host of people, disabled people are systematically excluded there, right? And disability becomes a rationale to exclude you from those rights from citizenship. And so, while things were certainly not equal, in fact, the British, system is rooted in hierarchy. The whole system is a hierarchical system. But when we have citizenship, suddenly there's that moment when people must include or exclude, right? And many people advocate for greater rights, and many people are also denied those rights. So this is a moment when those things are being figured out.
And I've got Dana Taylor, one of our production assistants, but also one of my advisory board councils backstage. And I have Scott Cooper, and I'd like to bring them both to the stage so that we can have this dialogue together. And I might just kind of do something like this and then take this off. Scott and Dana, welcome to the conversation. And Susan, again, you were passionate about laying out these topics for this Devva series because it made sense in order to kind of cover this from the founding and then move forward. So what's your feedback from Laura's presentation today, Susan?
Well, one of the things I'm curious about is whether intellectual disability was very different then and how different than now, because very few people read. I mean, there was the upper class that read, but reading was not something that was expected of everyone. And so that couldn't be a qualifier in terms of whether you were disabled or not disabled. So it would seem like there's a lot of things that we take for granted now as being part of what's being able-bodied that then were not.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So as you know, we talked about in the first part of this session too, right? That ability and disability are so rooted in time and place and so in context, right? And so what counted as intellectual disability in the 18th century certainly does not match what counted today. Those guardianship petitions that I started with, or the Richardson case, those are great for determining how people understood mental disability during this period, intellectual disappeared period. You know, and it's varied. But really what people talk about is whether that person can carry on a conversation. So the conversational abilities are really important. So think about that kind of oral and verbal engagement. But they're also really concerned with that person's ability to kind of, this is the law, right? So govern themselves, right? So personal care, dressing themselves, watching themselves, that type of personal care. So, you know, and, you know, the clothing, like, do they appear in public with the right kind of hat or the right kind of coat, right? These are all signifiers of whether that person, you know, neighbors believe them or family members believe them to be intellectually capable. So there's that caring for person piece, and there's the caring for property, right? So Richardson was asked to complete these arithmetic problems because they wanted to know whether he could, you know, manage the 300 pounds that was his real and personal property. So, you know, I think there's a lot of, I think it varies based on time and place. So that is like English, you know, well, English colonial and then, you know, early national context. But, you know, if you're in an African-American community, if you're an Indigenous community, if you're in different parts, different regions throughout the country, you know, that will vary slightly. But that is generally what I have found in those types of records. Great question.
Dana and Scott. Dana, you know, you're like me in terms of mainstream, but you actually have a disability in and around.
Actually,
you know,
I do have a very
Thank you so much, Lucy. What you may not know about me is I have a very disabled eldest brother. He is double amputee and became an incredible golfer to teach disabled people how to golf and get them into a sport and get in out. He was also recognized on U.S. sports by getting the more number or holes in one than most professional golfers back in the late 1990s. So very much issues of disability in my family, and so physical as well as others. So I'm very conscious of it myself. I'm fascinated by the intersection of the slave Black woman who was able to prevail in her case. And I personally am very intrigued to explore that further because, you know, we have 3 strikes against her. First, women were not recognized as being mentally capable to conduct their own affairs, which, as you pointed out, Susan, is a key component to why they deem disabled people. It goes back to our Anglo-Saxon Puritan blah, 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 coldness, lack of empathy roots, wherein if you were not able-bodied, we'll push you off the cliff, okay? So it comes down to that prevailing cultural perspective of if we have to care for you, then you do not deserve to live, or your legal rights are diminished if you're disabled or a woman in some capacity. So at a personal level, could you speak more to how she prevailed in that case?
Yeah,
what were her winning issues?
Yeah, so so when I started this project, you know, many years ago, and there's ways that disability is concomitant with Blackness, or, you know, that they're both mutually constituting, right? So that, you know, African Americans are disabled by their race, women are disabled by their gender. And yet I also find that disability is a distinct category of difference, right? So that, you know, some women say in guardianship, right, are deemed to be capable enough to manage their property, and other people are capable, not capable, right? So there still is that disability in flex along them. So it doesn't map perfectly on those other categories, right? It actually disrupts them often in really interesting ways. So that specific case about Anna is really interesting. And actually, she is not alone. There were many enslaved women. I'm not gonna say many. So these cases are really hard to find, first of all. So I have found most of them in Supreme Court records. There were probably dozens of them, maybe hundreds of them in lower court records that I have just not located. But there are many, I'm going to say like maybe 6 to 10 cases I can think about where enslaved women, those cases rose to higher courts, and thus I have testimony for them. And oftentimes these women are right, because women and men had to prove they were, this is the language, sound in mind and body and capable of labor to be manumitted, regardless of their enslavers' wishes, right? And of course, like enslavers had a lot of power in those courtrooms. So they would, if they wanted to manumit someone, and there was there's certainly, hierarchies of power. But there are definitely enslaved people that did fight back when county courts disagreed with them. And Anna is one of those cases. Other women also, one of their children was deemed to be mentally incapable or physically incapable, and they would fight for the freedom of their child. And I see that actually more than Anna's case. Anna fought for herself, but other women did that as well. Right, exactly. So yeah, it's really fascinating. And I will say just another way that enslaved people were able to navigate, this is obviously really, they have very, very little space to advocate for themselves, and anything that they do is laced with danger and the threat of violence. But, oftentimes when sales happened of enslaved people, disability was a rationale for return of that enslaved person. And oftentimes when the seller didn't accept that return, they would go to court. And so this is like the most common case involving enslaved people in court records during this period. And
they were defective. They were defective.
Yeah,
property, as it were, defective. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And breach of warranty. Yeah. And so these are just super common cases. But enslaved people did, their testimony was not accepted in court, but they did present their bodies and minds in ways to, negotiate.
Engage the court. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe they wanted to, escape a violent enslaver, right? And they wanted the sale to go through, or maybe they wanted to return to, family and friend, and they wanted the sale to be reversed, right? And so they had their own agendas too. And, this is really hard to get from the archives, but we can think about ways that enslaved people might have navigated that to their advantage. Another form of agency or advocacy in this moment.
Right. I find that very germane to today, because I think some of that argumentation needs to be brought to a focus right now, as I feel, as Mike was presenting at the very beginning of this broadcast, this show, that we are in these times again. So I find it very applicable, thank you, Susan, that the legal merits of gaining rights in courts, that historical information is extremely valuable in this time where we have a retroactive law invocation administration. So some of that is gold to bring to present time. In my honest opinion. Right.
Thank you for saying
very
that.
Much.
Yeah. A lot of this, this is also the records we have, but a lot of this unfolds in courts.
Yes. Yes, indeed it does. Go ahead.
I hear a little bit of chomping on keyboard. I'm not quite sure what that is. I thought it was Scott and I removed him, but it's still going. But Scott, I brought you back to the table. How do you react to Laura's presentation of ableism and activism since the founding of America, and as it kind of relates to today and the issues?
Well, as you were mapping out that era of American history, did you do the origins of going back to Magna Carta and seeing what that drove? Yeah. And experience, and the lived experience, and from Magna Carta to the revolutionary period. I was just wondering if you had any highlights of the previous 500 years.
Yeah. So thankfully, yeah, great question. Thankfully, a lot of I drew on other scholars for that, right? And so, as historians, like we can only study so much, right? And then we rely on our community to set it in context. And so actually there's really great scholarship about disability in early modern England. And I can put names in the chat if that would be helpful, but there's a really rich literature about this, and much of what I'm talking about would not be like a surprise at all to historians of the medieval period or of the early modern, of period. Guardianship became a system in, I think it's like 1180 or I'm not going to get that date wrong, but the 12th century, right? Is many of these exclusions date back that far, and so there's really great scholarship that details that, particularly in the English context. And much of that was still relevant, guardianship, like that language that was happening in the 12th century, it's updated and changed, and there's certainly changes, but there's ways that there's resonances across time, right? So I did not do that research myself, but I did use the work of other scholars to do so.
I was trying to get some of this.
We have a long history of people that aren't really interpreted as having it all together, being read into royalty.
Yeah, right.
Scott, we may be getting a little bit of feedback from your Zoom room,
That's why the Zoom room. So
exactly. So that's why I keep taking you on and off, because it's creating a little bit of background on that.
Right.
But
let me disconnect from Zoom. Oh no, I can't. Let's see. I don't know how.
And then I'll just bring Susan back up also. Susan, did you have any other follow-up questions? I mean, I wanted to kind of transition into the what can we do, what's your perspective now type of deal. But of course, opening the floor to Susan.
Lucy, I also see there's a question in the chat too, and here this chat, I don't know if that's useful.
Mm-hmm. This is our private chat. Okay, perfect. So let's just do this. And I'm going to create it into a banner. Now, if you guys are watching from Facebook or anything, then we could have brought that in. But this is from Gordon Fuller. Here's one. Are you familiar with any of the writings by the colonists as to how the indigenous people treated one another regarding diversity and disability and inclusion? Thank you, Gordon.
Good
one. Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Gordon. So this is really a really great question. I am not familiar with colonial writings. Personally, I'm not familiar with colonial writings about indigenous practices, but there are many, many scholars, well, not many, but there are some fantastic scholarship about indigenous history, disability, indigenous history. And as many, many scholars have shown, right, that disability was not a salient concept or category in indigenous communities, right? So, in European context, right, disability was something that was often used to denigrate, was a rationale for exclusion. This was not the case in indigenous communities. So, as long as people were able to participate in community reciprocity, to complete the task, to maintain relationships within their community, regardless of their physical or mental capacity, they were not excluded. They did not experience a reduction of their rights and their privileges within that community. So disability, and many indigenous scholars argue that disability, in fact, is a colonial concept that was imposed upon indigenous communities, right? So it is something that the concept of disability and then the practice of ableism is something that comes through the process of settler colonialism and European contact. So I can again put a lot of scholars in the chat there, but that is a really interesting. Most of my focus is on the colonial context and then the early national United States context, but it is not divorced from this history that as well. That is kind of early America is Native America, right? The vast majority of America is Indigenous America during this period. So it's really critical context. So thank you so much for asking.
We I was just going to make something. We are moving towards this time and place, right? And I don't know if somebody's typing it. It's just pretty loud. What do you think leaning in right now. Oh, this is what I wanted to say. Susan was not available when you were on, and I'm going to bring Susan back to the stage. Tell me, where do you teach? What do you do? And what's the general sense of like the new minds that you're actually teaching right now in this space?
Sure. Yeah. So I teach at University of Notre Dame. So I'm, zooming in from South Bend, Indiana.
Awesome.
We're actually right over the border in Michigan. And I've been here for about 5 years. So I started in the height of the pandemic that fall, and really feel like just the past few years with the pandemic have just started. I teach a wide range of classes. So I teach many classes focused on disability, introduction, disability rights and justice classes, introductions, history of disability classes. One of my favorite classes is an action-oriented class, project class, where students work together to on a project designed to increase access and inclusiveness on campus. So I have students that, advocated for ASL to be accepted as a foreign language, or to improve signage in the dining halls around food allergies, a variety of different projects. But, we had a grant to do that, and it was a really, really wonderful project. I think, students, for the most part, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier today, but are really unfamiliar with disability studies. They have almost no language to talk about it. There are some students who identify as disabled who have a little bit of language to talk about it. And there's many students, I would say the vast majority of students, certainly they signed up for the class, so, they probably biased, but they are very, very interested in disability, and they want to know more. And they suddenly realize, like, this is a rights and justice movement I did not know about. This is a civil rights movement. I want to know about this. I need to do something now. I'm an activist. But I think, before the class, they had no idea. And I think much, talking about disability is even scary. They don't want to say the wrong thing, but they're not quite sure what to say, and so I just think that there's a real lack of awareness. And, there are starting to be, I did a professional development thing for teachers a few weeks ago. There are starting to be a greater integration of disability studies in elementary and high school education, but it's certainly not where it should be. Some states have mandates, but I don't know how much those are followed, right? And so I think that kind of literacy in disability studies is limited. But I think students are just really hoping for this language. They want disability studies, but they just they don't have familiar with it yet. So exactly.
I really like what you just said there, because we do live in a world where these Gen Zers are really activists, and they've got their strong voices, and man, they know how to use social media, to the T. It's just crazy. Sometimes I worry that just because you have access to greater platforms doesn't make it right, and we have to kind of continue to, come towards the middle in terms of I think it's an exercise in civil discourse, in the ability to talk about issues. It's okay to say, it's okay to admit that I don't know. And I say this to Susan and Gordon all the time, say, listen, I've never worked with a blind person or somebody that is confined to bed. So please share with me if I say something wrong, or, what. So that's what we're really trying to do, is just kind of create this platform to be able to have this type of dialogue without shaming, without blaming, without canceling, without any of that stuff, right? But I love the fact that it is a rights and justice issue. And I've been forced to kind of take a look at Arizona, and again, Gordon puts this light, Gordon and Susan both put this light in me too, when we're talking to statewide advisory councils. For example, I'll be on Friday, this Friday, I'll be in Phoenix for a Black Disabilities conference for the state of Arizona. And there is a specific track for sickle cell patients. And because sickle cell patients are a specific type of, audience that has to live with some degree of disability. So I just challenge, the states and the communities to step up and say, are there gaps? Are there resources easily found at the county level and at the state level? And, call it out if there's gaps. And, I don't know. What's your kind of call to action to young people right now?
Yeah, I think awareness, education, getting involved, raising their voice. I don't, and I think that works. It doesn't sound very sexy or exciting, but I think that really, that's what we need, right? And there are, disability studies is marginalized not only in elementary and high school education, but I am one of 2 disability studies faculty members at Notre Dame, which has, I don't know how many faculty, but a lot more than 2, right? Like there's very, very little disability studies awareness and support among faculty as well as students, right? But I do think that, this kind of slow work to make change matters. And I really, I'm a historian, right? So I also really think research matters. I think we need to have these historical stories to guide our efforts today, right? And I think, when I'm doing my own research, right, finding these stories of people advocating for themselves, this is, life and death for them at that moment, 250 years ago, but that type of the techniques that they used, the strategies they use, their persistence, their diligence, the way they, utilize a network, all of these things I think are applicable today. And so I think drawing power from those histories, drawing power from how present today, the present issues in our current world. And I really think drawing the enthusiasm from, my undergraduate students, they want to engage, they might not be familiar with it or might not know how to, but they want to. And I think drawing from that enthusiasm to keep going.
May I interject briefly?
Absolutely.
To the future, which is very much something I've been excited to speak to, is I don't know if many people are aware how many of the geniuses in this current world, even going back, 100 years forward, were originally categorized as disabled and were originally considered in their childhood disabled or, in fact, pardon me for the use of this word, retarded. I myself was classified as that because I was so neurodivergent and had such high sensitivities that I had a lot of time necessary to process all the information that I was perceiving that others weren't. And there are so many people, Einstein, the wife behind Einstein, there are tons of geniuses that we can pull forward. I think speaking into the Gen Xers and younger as you speak, many of them are neurodivergent. We are, perhaps because of the pandemic or whatever, finding generations now going back where we are mutating and our disabilities, what would not be normative, are actually what are creating more empathetic and intelligent people simultaneously. EQ and IQ are increasing. And I think if we submerge or shut down people because they are not normative, we're losing all the potential genius that can be brought into the world. And so perhaps in incenting disability being adopted under that mindset with the younger generations, it might build some momentum.
Yeah, I really love that too. And I think, remembering these histories too, that creates a lineage, right? So, students today who are neurodivergent, right? If we remember those histories, if we recall those histories, we teach those histories of people who, had those labels, 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 200 years ago, if they had those labels, we teach those histories, those are powerful histories. That creates a lineage, right? It creates ancestors to look up to have a story, to have, you're represented in history. And I think that type of lineage is really resonant with a lot of folks. And I think also, these the students in my classes, they are in a way that, particularly with mental health issues, there's it seems that there's a bit less stigma around that. Students are, they're comfortable with the fact that oh yeah, we all kind of have mental health stuff going on. There's a way that there's sort of, there's a kind of a language that it's a bit more accepted. And I think that, we can use that to make, encourage them to make more change.
Even within the past decade, I feel like there's been a big shift on this
Yes.
younger generation. And I think that not only learning from a third-party perspective about the stories, but the interaction with everybody is really an accelerant in that as well. You know, like, and I keep coming back to my 4 weeks, 5 weeks with Susan and Gordon, right? Kind of just doing spot checks on our own accessibility with our online platforms. And here we are with apps, and just assuming that people have access to them, and just learning that there's a whole world of accessibility tools. You know, I've learned that Apple is, quite frankly, a forefront leader in the accessibility space over Android, even though Android has 70% of the global, you know, phones out there. So it's continues to be eye-opening. And Gordon often reminds us that, like you said earlier, Dana, the intellectual capacity that is almost mandated out of the disability space. He's like, we've been doing AI for 30 years. Like, where are you guys been? You know, and it's kind of like, it kind of mandates that advanced technology to, you know, kind of overcome some of those gaps there. But anyways, this has been a fascinating conversation. Susan, I pass the baton to you as we close out. It's been 2 hours of great conversation. This has been recorded. We can slice and dice and share around the social media platforms as needed. But let's go around the horn real fast. Final thoughts, Susan.
Well, I love everything when you talk. It's like, I love the stories. I can imagine what it was like before. I mean, I can imagine what it would be like if I had the life I have now 200 years ago. It would be no life. I mean, there's so much more now that a person who's significantly disabled can experience. And our language has evolved also in terms of how we describe people. I mean, people are no longer deaf. Well,
right.
They were never deaf and dumb. You know, but we used to think of people who were deaf or dumb automatically. The way we use the word blind. You know, we say people are blind to something. Well, people who, you know, it's a way of describing disability in a negative way. And we've sort of embraced these words in ways that we should discard completely. We shouldn't be using those words like that anymore at all. But that's part of our history, that those words were misused.
And no, you're
stigmatized.
absolutely, that's absolutely right. And you know, and the stigma is one thing that we are just trying to reduce all the way around, whatever that may be. Dana, final words of wisdom as we close out this session today.
Final words of wisdom is, I am really excited about two things. One, how the good, bad examples we currently have in our world will enable us to find better solutions to this hundreds, 200, 300 years worth of culture. I will speak of it as non-native culture that we've brought to this country, and how we too can learn to be more empathetic, accepting, and find the genius that we can carry forward into the future from this.
I love that. And Laura, you know, you've been watching the whole deal. Lauren.
It's Laurel. Yeah.
Laurel.
With an L at the end.
Gosh.
It's okay. Yeah. It's all right. I figured it out. Yeah.
What's your kind of takeaways from the sessions tonight?
Yeah. Well, it was just really such an honor to be a part of it. You know, I didn't know Devva, and it was just such a joy to hear people talk about her. And I just thank you all for creating such a wonderful space for people to talk and learn and engage. And if there's one thing I just wanted to share, you know, 2026 is going to be the 250th anniversary, right, of the founding of this nation. So, you know, disabled people are a part of that history, right? And, you know, that doesn't often get told, right, when we're celebrating that founding moment. We don't often think about disability. We don't often think about ableism. But if you have space to do that, you know, in your lives, or when people are talking about that historical moment, you know, bring disability to the conversation.
That's awesome. I wanted to go ahead and maybe, you know, let's preview next month and show some of the speakers really quickly. So for July 9th, we are featuring Brenda Jo Brueggemann, Rosemarie Garland Thompson, and Georgina Klieg for a segment called No Longer the Only One in the Room. That'll be part 1. And then part 2, I love that this is Lucy. We will be featuring a guest named Lucy Barnhouse, and she's going to be talking about the medieval disability history session. So again, I think it's fascinating, Susan, how you've kind of laid out the content for this to be shared with the general public, and of course to be further amplified and carried on for Devva, right? We bring up this little picture of her, and I just love this little graphic because I feel like we are just helping her carry her mission of taking the message out of the academic ivory tower into the general mainstream. And I know that that is a big mission of yours, Susan. So thank you all for joining. We will be here next month on July 9th. We will go ahead and continue to focus and fine tune the technical issues so that everybody can have great access. But for now, it's summertime. Pick one thing and practice it. You know, here at the Force for Health, we say, learn it, live it, and share it. So what did you learn today? How can you live it? And how can you go ahead and put it into action for sharing it? So until then, we will see you July 9th.
Those of you who don't want to leave, I'll head over to the Zoom room now. And so if people who are on the Zoom call want to continue a conversation, we can do that.
Perfect. So this will bring a close to our live session, and we'll see you live next week. Otherwise, after the show, we'll call it, we'll be in the Lead On Zoom room. So take care, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for joining us in Devva's Room, a special series hosted by Lead On and powered by the Force for Health Network. This is designed to be an interactive space where we honor history, elevate lived experience, and reimagine the future of disability justice together. Dr. Devva Kasnitz believed these conversations belonged in our communities, not just in classrooms. And today, you helped make that real. To keep learning, connecting, and organizing, join the Lead On community at the Force for Health Network, where your voice truly matters. Until next time, thank you for showing up, speaking up, and standing up. In the words of our inspirational leader, Justin Dart, known as the father of the American Disabilities Act, who passed away back in 2002, I love you. Lead on.